Guys, hi, this is Taylor coming to you with another installment of the Launch Pad with Moon Landing. I'm joined today by a very special guest coming to us from Denver. Hi, Homemade Spaceship. How are you doing?
Doing excellent. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. I am super stoked that you're joining us. I've been like kind of looking forward to picking your brain all week. Um,
Absolutely.
so kind of just to get started, I'd love to know, where did the name Homemade Spaceship come from?
So, yeah, there's a couple things. There's a whole meaning behind it that I found after I kind of thought of it, but yeah, I don't know, it just kind of came to me because I don't know, one of the things that I always did as a kid was I always kind of pretended like my mom's minivan was a spaceship and stuff like that or whatever car I was in, and that was a huge thing. And then eventually um just going through building random music stuff, like building my own pseudo music studio back in the day with all my little cheap little light up little controllers and stuff like that. um it I had a friend also who was also buying lots of studio gear, and he was keeping it at my house, and we had this little corner of my room in my apartment in Chicago when I was like 18 or 19. And we were just in there, and we would always kind of call it like, oh, the spaceship. And I kind of like thought of all that other stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, it's our little homemade spaceship, and it was really cool. We should call the Beat Lab that, man. We should call it the Homemade Spaceship. And then he never really wanted to do music, and I had a bunch of other really bad band name, like artist names and stuff like that, from back in the day. And he's like, oh, you should name your music project Homemade Spaceship. And I was like, dude, I love that. And yeah, like the big reasoning behind it, the big meaning behind it for me is just that I feel um like everyone has a homemade spaceship. It's kind of like what you use, that something you've built yourself, like your happy place that kind of takes you away from the gravity of Earth, and kind of like takes you somewhere else where nothing matters and there is no gravity. And and you're just kind of floating out there, existing and vibing with yourself, whether it's it's like knitting or playing video games, or jogging or exercising, or reading books, or doing pottery or something like that. I feel like art often is like an escape for everyone, and
Yeah,
so it felt really appropriate to kind of name that, because that's what music is for me, is like an escape. It's like this little space vessel, this is voyaging vessel that I kind of made up myself and made out of little parts of my room and stuff like that, and my imagination and stuff like that. And so it's like that makes perfect sense to call my music project that, because that's exactly what it does. Is it takes me away to kind of like my happy place where I can just create, and rent's never due, and all that kind of stuff, and there's no stress, or you know taxes or whatever, in that world. So
absolutely.
that's definitely like, yeah, that's kind of how the name, it kind of came to be, because I felt like I was building a spaceship. My friends had always kind of called me the spaceman too.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And the precursor was, yeah, they'd call me the homeless spaceman, because I was always sleeping on their couches, and then also just being very, very spacey and stuff like that. And I was obsessed with space too. I always remember when I was a kid and I was talking to the librarian and checking out the space books. And I remember I have this vivid memory of her going one time, like, "And space goes on forever." And I was like, "What?"
You mean
Like,
forever,
like
forever?
like like so like like just like keeps going on. And that just like blew my mind when I was in like third grade, and I was just
Yeah,
like, yeah. And a lot of my music, I feel like a big thing I tap into is like that kind of like childhood imagination type stuff that really like kind of keeps me young, keeps me going. And like I feel like as long as I can hold on to that, I'll always like have this musical connection and stuff like that, or this like kind of connection to art or whatever it is, so
that is
yeah.
the coolest name. I love that backstory. I think for a lot of us, music is kind of our escape, our happy place too. So that is super cool. I just love that so much.
Yeah.
You did say you're from Chicago, so you're a Chicago kid. And
Mm.
from my understanding, when did you move to Denver?
So I was like 23, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just living in the city. I moved to the city when I was like 18 or 19. And I moved to Chicago, and I was living down there. And Chicago life is just Chicago life,
Yeah.
Like everyone hates it, but they love it at the same time. Like they love to hate it, kind of. And
Uh-huh.
it's a fun vibe, and it's a busy vibe, and I love Chicago and stuff like that. But I wasn't really doing anything with my life out there. Like I was just like waiting tables and just doing really nothing, honestly. And so I was living with a bunch of people, and they all went separate ways. And at one point, I just kind of went on Facebook and was like, who has gotten a room for rent in Chicago? And my one friend was like, move to Durango, Colorado with me. We have a huge house in the mountains out there. And he's like, we're going to grow a bunch of weed and it's going to be so fun. And I was like, cool. So then I moved to Durango and I was like 24, 23, and went out there to grow weed and found out I was a terrible gardener. The weed was awful. Uh, and I was like, screw this. And living in the mountains wasn't what I wanted at the time. Being like 23, 24, I thought it would be so cool, but it was very isolating and like 45 minutes in or out anywhere. And it was just like, yeah, and it was ended up being stressful. So after that, I moved up to Denver with my friend. And we were like, yeah, I'm going up to Denver because Durango is also a college town. So
Yeah.
um, we were like, wow, and I'm 24. I'm older than all these kids. I felt like an old person. So I was like, let's move up to Denver. And then, yeah, moved up to Denver and uh, got a job at Guitar Center and started going to Cervantes and ended up playing there for the DJ battles. Lost every time, and then ended up getting some other gigs, and things kind of took off in the right direction. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's super cool. So in Chicago, you said you're kind of waiting tables. Did you end up like playing any music out there? Did you ever get a chance to play a gig before your move out here?
So when I was in Chicago, I always really wanted to play at this one place, Kinetic Playground,
Okay.
which was really cool. I remember seeing Splatterbox there, which was actually Grizz and Freddie Todd. Um,
Wow. Okay.
yeah, their old side project. They still have a SoundCloud up if you want to check it out. Yeah. There's a mix of theirs up there, and you could tell that the recording cable it gets plugged in all the way like 15 minutes in. It's pretty funny. But that was really cool. But no, not really, because that was one of the things that made me want to leave Chicago too, is because back then I was trying to be more of a studio person and stuff like that and work at studios, which I was doing.
Mhm.
And I kind of did music as like, well, everyone in the studio has Ableton and everyone makes beats and stuff like that. But a lot of Chicago, all the venues and stuff, very dominated by house music and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a big thing, and it has a big draw just being itself, and all the clubs. I remember playing this one club called Proof one time. And I remember I had the whole place going crazy, dropping like all sorts of cool bangers and stuff like that. And the owner of the club goes up to me and he's like, if you play another bass, in his like accent too, he's like, if you play another bass wobble, I'm turning off the music. And like, so like they didn't want me to play that kind of music in Chicago, like
Mhm.
even if I could find a gig. And I did play, there's some really cool after hours spots. My friend I ran this place called the Wobble Room, which was really cool. And all sorts of other stuff. And Manic Focus was out there coming up at the time too, which was really
Okay.
cool.
Yeah.
And he was getting some gigs and stuff, but it was really hard to get a show. And I'd set up a couple things and they went decent, but there's no real scene for it. And also with Chicago being such a big city, and a lot of the bigger shows were already booked with tour acts, that ones that would come through the bigger venues and stuff like that. There was like no chance of getting on them. So I didn't play as much, and that was definitely a thing that brought me out to Colorado. Was like, I hear that they have a big electro soul and a much more diverse music scene out there, and
Mhm.
just a huge crowd of people who go to a lot of shows. And I saw that as definitely like an opportunity, and it was totally true too. Because when I finally got out to Colorado, like I said, I was playing dubstep nights at Cervantes, and I ended up getting booked on. I remember like the Philos records and Michael Menert and this dude. Um, Mikey Thunder and Matty O'Neill's old project would always play there at these like retro futurism events and stuff like that, they called it. And
Mhm.
there's just so much more of a scene for it out there. So that was definitely a reason why I moved to Colorado too, is because I was like, oh, cool, maybe I could actually do something with all these beats that I've been making. And it was hard to take myself seriously at the time when I felt like there wasn't an outlet for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when
Absolutely.
I finally moved to Colorado, I was like, I kind of sunk my teeth in and was like, oh, we can do this. Like, there's people out here who actually want to hear this. And
Yeah.
now when you're playing your own music, I play my own music in Chicago, and I remember like some like just like super drunk person came up to me. He's like, "Can you play some dancey music?" Like she just wanted to hear house music, and I was just like, "Oh, it's not what I'm doing." Like I should
Yeah.
try to get you a request or something like that. Will you play some Drake? Like it's like, oh
Like,
gosh,
I don't know.
no. I made all this music myself, but I see that you don't like it. So yeah,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah,
Here's
yeah.
some Miley Cyrus for you, real
Yeah,
quick.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I guess I'll just start playing the hits. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Versus everyone's really open to, they're a lot more open to a lot of different stuff in Colorado, which was really cool. So, yeah,
Yeah.
not a lot of gigs in Chicago, but when I finally started really going after it when I moved to Colorado. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know about, I mean, I think in Phoenix, we get the classic Phoenix to Denver pipeline.
oh,
All of us
yeah.
bass heads want to be in the bass capital so bad. So I'm sure that's like same thing for the Midwest to Denver as
Oh,
well.
yeah. Yeah. And I meet so many transplants from Chicago and Denver too.
Yeah,
It's laughable. Yeah. Yeah. I love
that's so
it.
cool. Okay, very
Yeah.
cool. So you kind of said you play guitar. What other instruments do you? Where did you kind of get your roots in music? I guess was it electronic only?
No, no, almost not electronic music, and I honestly don't listen to a lot of electronic music, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I grew up, I started playing guitar when I was like 11 or 12, um, and I was obsessed with like Blink-182 and Sum 41 and like a lot of punk rock and No Effects and stuff like that. And that's what I started playing a lot when I was a kid. And then I had my friend Kevin's older brother Luke really got us into both Wu-Tang Clan and Tool, I remember.
Okay.
Like those were his two favorite groups, and so he got us into that, and that really changed my perspective. But started playing guitar, and then my whole friend group throughout middle school and high school really revolved around like other people who played music. So we kind of like, and I had an old shed that I had at my house that wasn't being used, and we just decided to throw a crappy little makeshift drum kit in there and all of our amps and stuff. And then a couple of my other friends, we had little like garage setups, and so we ended up. Which is a good precursor to production for me was that I would play guitar for a little bit, then we would all rotate. Then I would play drums, and someone else would play bass, and the other person would play keyboards, and then we'd rotate again. So everyone kind of had to get good at every instrument, because we all wanted to take turns, playing the drums or playing guitar. So that was really cool, and so we started doing that. A lot of like punk rock. I was really into ska music for a while in high
Okay.
school, but a lot of like metal and like hardcore like metal and hardcore punk and like death metal and stuff like that is really what I'm still really into and stuff like that. And I used to play in like a hardcore band in Chicago for a while. We were called the Celebrator. We had a couple cool shows, and um yeah, and sort of just played mostly that music. And then my best friend Nikki, she dragged me. She was always really into like Fish, Widespread Panic, and all sorts of other stuff. And I was living with her in Chicago for a bit, and she was like, "We're all going to summer camp, and you're coming, summer camp music festival."
Yeah.
And
Okay.
yeah, which is like a huge festival in the middle of Illinois. Humphreys headlines it, and there's always like Pretty Lights and Grizz and all sorts of other people have always headlined, and Sound Tribe and stuff. It's really cool. But she's like, "You're coming," and I was like, "I hate that stuff." And then she was like, "I don't care." She's like, "We're just gonna go party in the woods for a weekend, and you're coming." And I was
Yeah.
like, "Okay, cool." And so I went, and I remember I saw Pretty Lights, and I was like, "Oh no way!" Like, cool. Like, I can make electronic music, and at that time my mind thought that electronic music was either like Dead Mouse, Tiesto, Cascade, or Aphex
Yeah.
Twin and Venetian snares and like weird shit. So I didn't know that there was this really cool, groovy, creative middle ground, and that opened my eyes up. And I remember, yeah, I always say like I left summer camp with a grassroots hat and 5 pins in it, and I like was
Yeah.
chairs and went home and started like really making lots of beats. But yeah, that was kind of how I started getting into production and the kind of the music. So it's kind of just been dabbling in all the instruments my whole life. I play guitar on stage, but I also recently started playing flute on stage too.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Um,
so like that's been a fun journey, and I just started learning like 2 years ago because I was like Wu Tang is a huge inspiration. RZA I think is like a personal inspiration on a personal level and also on a musical level because he's so like he's so like center minded, and he's like very like, he loves like, meditation and just awareness and stuff like that, but his music's awesome too. And there's a lot of like flute in that golden era hip hop, and so I was always on these sample loop websites looking for loops of flute loops, right? And they all sucked, and I was like, this one's too airy, this one's too much, like I just want this.
Mhm.
And then I just remember being like, I was like 30 or something like that, 29 or 30. And I was just like, I'm 33 now. But I was just like, oh man, if only I knew how to play flute. And then I was like, wait a second, dude. Like, this is your reality, bud.
Yeah.
Like fifth graders learn how to play the flute. Like, I think your 30-year-old high ass could figure it out, and
Yeah.
an Amazon order and a couple YouTube videos later, I was playing flute. And then, like, yeah, I just kind of started practicing, and it was really fun after, like, playing guitar for almost 15, 20 years and all those other instruments for almost 15, 20 years to start anew with a new instrument. So I was really fascinated with it, and really started playing it a bunch. And I was like, yeah, I could play this on stage. And so
Definitely. Yeah.
I just kind of like was like, oh, I really could just do this, and it wasn't hard. I think within like a couple months, I was playing like pretty fluently, and um, especially like being on a computer, I don't have to play things perfectly all the time, which is nice. Especially when I was
Yes. Yeah.
starting, I could just chop it and fix it, and stuff like that. So yeah, guitar and flute on stage. I've considered bringing in like live synthesizers or other stuff like that too, but I do try to keep it pretty simple. But yeah, I like to think that I can really just figure out whatever instrument, even if it takes a while. But yeah, I had an accordion for a little bit, and that was really fun to play with. Just like
Okay.
putting a bunch of weird effects on it and stuff like that. And also as a chest workout to play,
I'm sure. Yeah. You're doing the
which
chest
is
fly.
interesting. Yeah, and you gotta like and I would be watching accordion lessons on YouTube too, and the dudes would always have like crazy mustaches and stuff like that. And it's like, I'm the accordion master, Geraldo. And I'm just like, no way. Which was cool. But yeah, I was using it, and it's a reed instrument, which is interesting, like a clarinet or like a saxophone. So
Oh, okay.
it's like, yeah, it's like, yeah. Yeah, so I got a lot of really cool sounds out of that. But that's part of the homemade spaceship thing too, is like, what's in the
Yeah.
garage? What can we use to make something? Because I don't really need to know how to play it really well. I kind of just need to know how to play one note, if anything, and then start messing with that. So
Yeah. Absolutely.
um, yeah, that's kind of like the instruments that I play. I kind of like to mess around with. But yeah,
Yeah, that's kind of a segue. So you said that what's in the garage. So you're kind of like the homemade DIY master. So I was doing a little digging. One of the songs that I think I first heard from you was Pockets.
yeah.
Um, I was curious, like I was wondering, like, what was the inspiration behind that? How did you kind of get the sounds to kind of go into that as well?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's it's funny because it's called Pockets because we made it out of stuff that was in our pockets at the time, me and Vibe Squad.
Okay.
That's what I was thinking, because like first off, I made a little drum beat, and then I needed a cowbell. And once again, I found myself like looking for cowbell samples on my computer, and they were all just really bad. And I was like, I went in my pocket and I had a lighter, and I was drinking a cup of tea, and I started banging my lighter on the cup of tea, and it just sounded like a perfect little cowbell after I pitched it down. And then I had my keys in my pocket too. So I jangled those for a shaker, and then I flicked the lighter, and there was a receipt in there too. And so for the big bass sound, what it is a sound of paper crumpling, just looped really, really small. So it's called granular synthesis, where you take just a
Okay.
grain of sound and you loop it really, really tight. And I put a bunch of distortion on it. Um, I did that for the horn sound too. And yeah, I was able to create all these crazy sounds. And it was funny because wasn't necessarily trying to, I was like, I'm going to take this piece of paper and I'm going to make a horn sound out of it. It was really cool process because I was playing with the piece of paper sound, and the way that I had sort of messed with it, I was like, "Ooh, that kind of sounds like a horn. I could go with that." And so like the weird method of starting kind of created this, and led me towards the results rather than me trying to chase out and seek out certain results, which I thought was cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole song is all almost entirely, besides like the drums and the snare and a couple other instruments and stuff like that, and like the organ. It's all just like stuff I had made out of things that were in my pockets, which was which actually sounds like it might be a challenge, but by approaching it from that way, it made everything a whole lot easier, which was
Really? Okay.
which was funny. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're kind of the Ableton master. I know you teach some classes for Ableton, right? Is that the
Yeah.
case? Um, what are some of your, I'm not coming from a production
Yeah.
side of things, but what are some of your like your favorite plugins or some of the ones that you think a up and coming producer should know about as well?
Well, just basic sampling, I think, is something that's so slept on. Like I was saying with pockets, just like sampling stuff. So a lot of people see sampling as sort of taking someone else's music and chopping it up, right? But that's just one perspective of sampling. Sampling also is taking any sound and playing with it. So the way I like to sample a lot is that I will take like one owl hoot, right? Like whoo or something like that. And I'll
Okay.
take a chunk of that and loop that and I'll spread it across each chord. So the first C note will play it normally and the next C sharp will play it a little higher, D a little higher. And you can actually make like keyboards out of one singular sound. And like, I think if there's any producers out there, like, don't sleep on that whole simpler sampler and making your own almost like keyboard or piano sounds
Mhm.
out of simpler and sampler or just samplers in general. Because, like with the owl hoot, for example, there's so much natural flow and movement in that owl hoot, or if it's any sort of sound, a doorstop being slapped, or one note of a real instrument, or one little section of a vocal take where someone's singing one note. Like there's so much natural timbre, there's so much natural vibrato and movement and pitch dive and the way the sound dies out, and it's so awesome to be able to capture this one tiny section of sound, and really really play with it, and turn it into a whole world, because all these sounds, when you synthesize sounds, you have to manually put in all the little details and embellishments and movements. But
Mhm.
when you're using like a sampler to create a keyboard sound, um, you're capturing all this natural beauty and stuff like that exists on these like really small levels sometimes too. Yeah, simpler and sampler is extremely slept on in the ways that you can kind of just create these really insane, beautiful sounds out of the most simple things. Like even if you just want to whistle really quick, just like, you know,
Mhm.
and you put that in there and make a whole keyboard out of that, it's insane how beautiful that can come out. And I love that kind of stuff because it's like, it's like anything, everything has a really like, like a depth of beauty to it when you look at it, no matter where you are or what you're doing. Like you could be in a subway station, and like if you just kind of zone out for a second and try to soak in any sort of beauty that's there, you can start noticing patterns and designs, and maybe a little piece of art on the wall or some sort of graffiti or something like that that's really beautiful and cool looking. And it just really reminds me of that there's just like so much beauty. And I also think it's so cool with the technology we have these days to make music, because it was these people, musique concrète in the 1940s, that were some of the first people to record another tape recorder with another tape recorder. So they're like, we're going to take this note of a piano off this tape recorder and we're going to pull it through slower and backwards through the tape reel so it sounds reversed and lower and stuff like that. But then they had to record that with another tape machine, and like just playing with sounds in general is something that was so difficult until like the year 2000 to like 1995, and like it wasn't even easy until recently, like the amount of undo we have and being able to flip things, reverse them, speed them up, and explore in the like in and outs of all these like little sounds and stuff like that. So I just think it's really really cool. Like a lot of people take for granted. They're like, I need more presets for my synthesizer, I need more sounds, I don't have enough. And it's just like, oh, there is so much in one sample. I was actually proving that point to some students recently, and I took a
Mhm.
chicken sound, just like, "Bark," or something like that. And
Okay.
all I did was I drew like the craziest up and down pitch pattern. So within like 1/2 second, it went up and down octaves like 7 or 8 times, like super fast. And it sounded a lot like it sounded like a really good, actually, like a sound that someone like Chime or Ace Aura or like Leotrix or those color based artists with like
Mhm.
the really sparkly, pretty sounds. And
Yeah.
I was astounded too, but my students were like, "What the heck? Like that was a chicken. Now it sounds like an awesome drop sound." And I was like, "I was telling you guys, I didn't mean to prove this point that hard, but like, holy cow! Like, yeah,
You
there's
were
beauty
also shocked.
everywhere."
Yeah,
Yeah, and that comes from I watched this one Skrillex Twitch stream a long time ago, and I remember something he said that stuck with me. He's just in his all excited little Skrillex voice. He's like, "You can make something out of anything, man. It's so cool. It's so fun." And I was like, "He's right, man. Like, there's little potentials in everything. It's just slowing things down or reversing them or playing with them in weird ways." And yeah, that's probably one of my top things. Is yeah, don't sleep on just playing with audio recordings and stuff like that.
that is, I love that. Even like the message in that is just like, you can find beauty in the simplest of things. I think
Yeah.
I've seen, I've seen videos of like Fred again recording old men
Yes.
talking on subways and stuff, like, just like little things like that. And then he makes amazing music out of it. So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
is,
His tiny desk is nuts too. It starts with him
yeah,
just like tapping on the desk, and then all of a sudden you're like, "That's a really good kick drum, like drum beat sound." And he's like, "Oh, he made that on tapping on a desk." Like,
yeah,
yeah,
that is,
it's so
that is so neat.
yeah.
Um, so out of curiosity, so you kind of mentioned that you have played flute, you played accordion. That kind of leads us into what I've been most excited to talk to you about is your newest album,
Okay.
Ghost Ride the Spaceship.
Yeah.
Um, how much of that in the album has your instrumentalist background come into play, or what kind of inspired this album as well?
Okay, yeah. Well, a lot of it is like that. I really didn't want to do any features or anything like that, so I really wanted to do it all myself. And a lot of it comes from me creating loops on my computer and then chopping them up myself rather than like sampling someone else's music or something like that. I still will sample other people's music and I love it, but I do like love to have the control of building my own sample. So that was kind of like one of the big processes for the album was to sort of create my own samples and then go from there, and use those as like the firewood for the album and stuff like that. um, and so that's definitely a huge part of my process is I sort of write a song, write a regular old loop, a regular old song, and then I sort of spacify it or bassify it or whatever you want to say, and I'll chop it up and flip it and reverse it and make crazy weird things out of it, stuff like that. And yeah, but like I said, homemade spaceship, whatever's in the garage. If I have to make something myself, or if I have to use an old lawnmower part to slap it into the side of the spaceship, if I have to use it a loop or something like that, I don't care. There's no rules. The only end game is making good music, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so that was definitely like more of the production process for writing the album, and
Mhm.
that was like a whole month ahead of time before I kind of embarked on the journey of doing it because I kind of wanted to prepare myself, and I was sick of just kind of putting out writing one song and writing another song. I really wanted to make a whole batch, and I really feel like a lot of people told me not to put out an album, like a lot of my like professional friends, because they're like, nobody listens to that, nobody listens to all that
Oh,
stuff, you should put
yeah,
out EPs. But I was like, no, people love mixes, right?
that's
So
true.
I'm gonna
Hmm.
write an album, and one of my favorite albums of all time is Animals by Pink Floyd. And
Oh,
if you listen to
I have
that
a
album,
Pink Floyd tattoo
yeah,
right here. Yeah,
yes,
animal. It's an animal
and it's
tattoo, actually.
animals too. Let's
Yeah,
go,
it
dude.
looks
Let's
like that on
go.
that little pig.
Yeah, so
That
you
is so
get it.
cool.
You're cool. Yes, awesome. Yeah, and as you know, that album is seamless from front to back. Mine
Yeah.
isn't that seamless, but maybe the next one will be. But
Mhm.
yeah, and they had a theme to it and everything too, right? Sheep, dogs, pigs
Yeah.
on the wing, right?
Mhm.
All that stuff. And I was like, it's got a theme. It's seamless. That's what I want to do because that's like a really intricate mix. And I've been really getting into storytelling with my music. So like I'm a big nerd. Like I love like those like a lot of the Japanese RPG video games with the storylines like Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy and stuff like that. That's like what I grew up a lot of playing. And it wasn't necessarily the playing of the game that really affected me long term. It was the hero's journey, the story, defeating evil, good overcoming and stuff like that. And I
Mhm.
loved that about it. And so when I went to write the album, I wanted to write an album that was basically like a story of a wannabe spaceman, a guy in a garage who just really needed to get off of Earth. So he builds his own spaceship and he blasts off into space. And the story behind it is that essentially the first song, Kick Dust, starts off with the John F. Kennedy speech, like, we must go to the moon and stuff like that. Like he just wanted to go out to space. It's very energetic. Then Astro Jones, he meets an alien, and the alien is like cool. So I've always had this like this hopeful dream of getting abducted or meeting a really cool alien who's
Yeah.
like, no, dude, I party, I chill. You want to make music together, you know? And so they meet, and that's what Astro Jones is. And Astro Jones is the alien, and I'm hoping to bring back some sort of like lore or canon of it. Maybe make Astro Jones t-shirts. It's like an alien wearing a cowboy hat or something like that, and like
I love that. Yeah.
googly eyes or something. Yeah. And then gassed up is where they sort of like start getting gassed up and they start driving the spaceship recklessly, which fits the Ghost Ride the spaceship theme. And then the fourth song, Space Blaster, is where they get blasted in space by like other like space pirates or something like that. The interlude is where they go into the wormhole. So they accidentally, when trying to get away from, the violence or whatever, they accidentally get sucked into a wormhole. And this guy's intention, he always had this intention just to leave Earth, right? And he never really had an intention to return, but he didn't really think about that. And so he gets sucked into a wormhole. On the other side of the wormhole, the interlude also is the wormhole. And a lot of my albums are going to be formatted this way in the future. I think I've decided. And the interlude's written really weird. So it's written in a very odd and undancey time signature, which kind of comes off as confusing. It's written in a really weird scale and stuff like that. And it's just a weird piece of music. I was really tapping into my inner like Aphex Twin on that one. Um, and then they come out of the wormhole and they have no idea how to get back home. He has no idea how to get home. It's just like impossible. And so now it's very much like, if I did want to return home, I can't. I'm forever on a journey, which just makes sense for like everyone's life, I feel like.
Mhm.
Sort of like we kind of go off and now we're just kind of forever on this journey and we realize we can't go back to childhood or go back in time or anything like that. So we just got to kind of keep going on. And so the next songs like Elevation is supposed to be like, oh, we're in a whole new world and it's beautiful and we like it. Electric Indigo is kind of written on the idea of sort of like being lost in space with someone that you love, or something like that. Just like,
Mhm.
hey man, I don't really need anything, like home is with you, kind of vibes. And that was a really like pretty song.
That one's
Um,
definitely been on repeat for me this week.
dude,
I've
yeah.
been listening to it all the time. That's
Dude,
great. I
that's
love
that's one of my
it.
favorite songs I've ever made. Yeah, it's definitely got that like emotional journey of like I feel like you're just holding someone's hand and looking out at space and just being like we're just going out there, and it's
Mhm.
beautiful and I'm happy about it.
Yeah.
And then yeah, there's Chaka, which is just another like space journey type song. I felt like what if we're just having fun exploring space, and then my sunshine is supposed to be like when the first time you see another solar system again or like another
Mhm.
star and it's like the sunshine on your face and like you can kind of see each other again in the sun and it's weird. Um and yeah, and then the last song, Voyager, is another wormhole. So, but this time they go into the wormhole purposely
Okay.
to get lost because they say, hey, why not just jump in another one and end up somewhere else? It doesn't matter, right? And that's
Mhm.
why another reason why it's like 12, 11 minutes long or something like that. And just a weird, it's unlike any of the other songs and it's really weird. And that was something I felt was really cool that I had the freedom to do on an album because I'm really cementing my vibe and kind of putting a really good image out there of the music that I'm trying to make while also being able to be artistic and express myself and do
Yeah.
something weird and off-putting that other people aren't doing. Which is, I feel like also with myself, the more I try to fit in and the more I try to fit in with the trends of the EDM scene or whatever, the worse my music is. So this
Yeah.
was me really being like, to just really do some weird stuff and make sure it's weird, but make sure it's honest and make sure it's not annoying, but be weird, be interesting, be different. And I felt that freedom on the album, and yeah, that's basically the story of the album and like how I wrote it and why I wrote it and stuff like that. And it's really easier to create for me when I have some sort of restrictive guidelines.
Yeah.
If I just
Absolutely.
kind of pick from an infinite pool, I just get lost and I go
Mhm.
nowhere.
Yeah.
So it was really helpful to do that, and it started off as a challenge and ended up being easier. So
That is super. I think it kind of speaks to like who you are as an artist as well. This album, finding comfort in the uncomfortability. Like you are pretty
yeah.
experimental in your music, so that is. I love the backstory behind it. That is really neat. And it sounds like you weren't, I know we're kind of getting low on time, but it also sounds like you haven't really been taking a rest because you also had a song released on Clozy's album, sorry, Clozy's label.
Label, yeah,
Um,
Odyssey. Yeah.
and that has flutes in it, right? That's you playing the
Yeah,
flute in
that's
it?
me. That's
Okay.
all me on the flute. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
first part was me literally playing one note and I played that onto a keyboard and made chords
Mhm.
out of it. And I played more flute on it. Yeah.
That was a great song too. That one's definitely been on repeat as well. You know, as we kind of come to a close, I think it is probably for a reason that you did an interview with Moon Landing because we also
I
have
love that.
our wannabe space cadets that follow our page as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
Any last words you'd like to say for people joining us? Anything you'd like to speak to?
No, just like thank you to everyone who's checked out the album. I hope you like it. Stay tuned. There's a whole lot more music coming. I already have, I believe what I'm going to do next is like 3 EPs, all based off of different worlds that they're visiting, and they're all going to be kind of themed as you see. Like I have more of like a dubstepier side with like the gassed up song, and like also with the mana shifter, like the Odyssey Closey release. It's a lot prettier. So I kind of really want to cement which styles I want to do and just kind of visit different planets with the same vibe. So there's a lot more music coming out soon. I'm about to announce another a remix for my friend Bass Physics. It's going to be coming out on the 14th, which is going to be really awesome. So whole remix album of the album coming too. So lots of new stuff on the horizon for 2023 and 2024. So yeah, hop on the journey, please. And yeah, appreciate everyone who's been listening and checking it out and stuff like that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're very excited to hop on the spaceship with you, go on this next wormhole as well.
Yeah.
Thanks again, guys, for joining us. My name's Taylor. This was an episode of The Launchpad. You can check out Ghost Ride the Spaceship and some other Homemade Spaceship new music on all of the socials. We'll probably have like a pretty little visual
Yep.
right here. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Taylor. Yeah.
Thank you.